I hope you attempted the activity, okay? And it's really not very difficult, okay? The only difference is in the previous example, we were counting up, right? We were counting up. The counter was incremented. In this example, though, we count down, right? We count down. So we set the counter to 10, right? We say counter equals 10. That's the initial value of counter. And then what we say is while counter is greater than or equal to 1, okay, print counter. Print counter. And then the way counter is updated is counter equals counter minus 1, right? So let's type that code and run it again. So we start with the initial value of counter, which is equal to 10. And then we ask the question, is counter less than 10? I'm sorry, counter is greater than equal to 1. If it is greater than equal to 1, then we print counter, uh, print counter, and then we decrement the value of counter, right? So counter equals counter minus 1, right? And when we run it, it says 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Now, you could also say, like, as you must know by now, that this can also be written in a shorter form, which is counter minus equals 1, right? That decrements the counter. Same result, right? Now, one thing that people often sort of miss, right? It's sort of a mistake that happens quite a lot, even with me. Okay, is you say counter equals 10, counter greater than equal to 1, and then you say counter equals counter plus 1. Okay, you say counter equals counter plus 1, and this messes up the entire thing. Okay, because you're counting down. Okay, you're starting from 0. Okay, and then you keep on incrementing the counter. I'm sorry, you're starting from 10 and you keep on printing the counter and incrementing the counter. The counter becomes 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on and so forth. But what happens is this condition never is never false. Okay, counter is always larger than 1, which again comes to an infinite loop, right? So when I run this program again, this is what happens. Okay, this is what happens. It keeps on increasing and increasing. Okay, it never stops because the condition doesn't make sense, right? I start with 10 and I ask the question, is counter greater than 1? And this condition is never it's always true, okay, because I never decrement the counter. The counter is always increased, right? So the program keeps on running and the counter value keeps on increasing, right? And this condition continues to be satisfied. Okay, so that's another thing that you must be careful about. Yet another common mistake which even I sometimes make is, this is correct, counter equals counter minus 1, this was correct, but what you did by error was, while counter is less than equal to 1, while counter is less than equal to 1, and what will happen here is when you run it, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens. Why doesn't anything happen? It's because you set the counter to 10 and then this condition is evaluated to false, right? Counter is not less than 1 and it'll never be, right? Because the counter equals counter minus 1, it happens inside this while loop. And because the very first condition is not satisfied, right, it will never come inside this statement right here. Okay, so this condition would evaluate to false in the very first iteration, the very first time, and then we'll just directly stop the program. Okay, so this is again something to take care of. Okay,